Isn't this just a pretty obvious example of a reason why facial recognition technology should be banned unless by exception? It's not like there was a consent problem here where there was a privacy policy which wrapped up a whole bunch of additional use cases like you're worried about, Lizzie, and I'll be worried about too. It was more that there wasn't any way for the customers to consent, and therefore they were just basically taking this information. And because the laws haven't caught up, what they could do with this is the potential misuse of that data is remarkable. I mean, it's kind of infinite.
Welcome to Burning Platforms, our fortnightly look at the intersection between tech and politics, brought to you by Per Capita's Centre of the Public Square. I'm Peter Lewis. This week we take a deep dive into the tech, business and philosophical evolution of OpenAI with Lee Schofield from Future Is Now. But first, our regular roundup of the latest news with Digital Rights Watch Chair Lizzie O'Shea and Health Engine CEO Dan Stinton. Well, welcome back to the joys of virtual attics and virtual Shea Lounge, or real ones, Lizzie. We've been away for a few weeks with a live briefing a couple of weeks ago around the privacy laws, where we had a great turnout. We hadn't done one of these live Zooms since really the lockdown, and we had pretty good room, about 100 people, and a great discussion. So we'll be looking at doing more of that over the coming months. But we have got Dan back again to join us for our regular discussion. G'day, Dan.
G'day, Peter. Glad to be back.
And our special guest this episode, Lee Schofield, who is the founder of Future for Now, which is a training organisation in AI literacy, particularly working with women from marginalised backgrounds. Lee was asked to come along because she spends a lot of her time deep in the weeds with the functionality of generative AI, and I thought it'd be great to get someone who's been working with the technology to help us think through some of the various developments that have been occurring at OpenAI. So hi, Lee, thanks for coming along for the ride.
Thanks for having me.
Great. That will be our deep dive in the second half of this episode. But it's been so long since we kicked around the news, so I reckon we should start by diving into our hot takes. And right on brand, Lizzie, there's been some developments around a privacy claim that was brought against 7-Eleven back, I think, in the middle of the pandemic around emojis and video surveillance and what data was being collected of staff and customers. Do you want to tell us what's gone on?
Yes. So in 2021, so a few years ago now, the regulator, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, found that 7-Eleven had breached Australia's privacy laws. And the context for this was that customers going into 7-Eleven stores were able to fill out a customer survey about their experience. And in the course of doing that, the technology captured their facial image and then turned that into a string of numbers and stored it somewhere, basically to try and avoid the customer service survey being hacked by people filling it out multiple times. And in the course of running that program, there was 1.6 million faces that were collected. And it's not clear that there was any real consent at all. Like, there was some notice about the fact that facial recognition technology might be being used in the store, but not when you were filling out the survey. And this caused quite a bit of controversy at the time, because biometric information in the form of facial information is obviously very sensitive. You can't change it, if it gets hacked or stolen. And it can be used to train other algorithms and the like. So it's a very sensitive piece of information. It's governed in a particular way under the Privacy Act as sensitive information. But basically, 7-Eleven was found to be in breach of the Privacy Act, and then since then, it appears that the regulator has been going through a process of trying to get them to change their processes so that they are compliant. And I only recently found this out, but apparently there was an inadvertent by 7-Eleven restarting of the system throughout 2023, notwithstanding it had been found to be in breach of the act, and they collected a further 45,000 facial images, and they say that this was unintended or whatever, and they shut it down as soon as they found out. But it's sort of shocking to me that happened. But that gives you an insight into why the OAIC has been kind of counselling them to get compliant with privacy laws in the 3 years since the decision was made. They now have wrapped up the investigation. They say it's over. They're happy with where they're at. But I do think it is an interesting...
Can I just ask before you go into the outcome, was it a conspiracy or a stuff-up? Because I remember us talking about at the time, and the idea of capturing faces while they're telling a machine how they're feeling is a potentially really strong base of, I would have thought, data, apart from the fact that you're probably scowling because you can't see what you're doing on the screen, or at least I can't. But do you know what I mean? Like, you're saying I'm happy and you're getting a photo of someone who's self-identifying as happy. That's pretty interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, the other point here about it is that they were using a third-party provider to do the analytics of data matching. I mean, they say that it was only used to determine whether somebody was filling out this survey multiple times. So that's why their face was transformed into a print that could then be matched against somebody trying to fill it out multiple times. Because the theory was someone who worked in a 7-Eleven would just fill this out multiple times.
I'm happy.
As you can imagine. That's how I feel when I go into a 7-Eleven. And so you do wonder about whether the third-party provider, you do wonder what they might use this technology for, because they have got some pretty important information there about 2 bits of information they can use it at various points. So some of that remains a little unclear to me because they weren't the subject of the investigation. It was just the 7-Eleven, the company that was collecting the information. So that is a bit disappointing, because I think there is a whole vast system behind the scenes of kind of what people might call de-identified data, but is actually cohorts of people who might not have their name and address attached to them, but they do tell you something about that group of people that's then used, to match with a lookalike audience. Basically, that privacy is more than just a violation of information when it relates to you, but that your personal information, when put together with others, has a real impact or potential commercial benefit for companies that collect it at scale. And that seems to be something that's a bit beyond this particular investigation, because the focus was really on the behaviour of 7-Eleven. So I think it's a valid point in that sense.
Dad?
Yeah.
You wouldn't mind data that showed you how people were feeling, particularly if they felt sick?
I'm sure there are some useful applications for this. This is not one of them, though. Just as a side note, does anyone else find it incredibly annoying that now when you try and pay for things, I had to do this the other day at Barbecues Galore, and they made me fill out a survey as to whether or not I was happy with the service before they would let my credit card go through. Anyway, side note. And it's, by the way, it's happened a few times to me. I'm sure it's happened to many of our listeners too. Isn't this just a pretty obvious example of a reason why facial recognition technology should be banned unless by exception? I mean, it's not like there was a consent problem here where there was a privacy policy which wrapped up a whole bunch of additional use cases like you're worried about, Lizzie, and I'll be worried about too. It was more that there wasn't any way for the customers to consent, and therefore they were just basically taking this information. And because the laws haven't caught up, what they could do with this is the potential misuse of that data is remarkable. I mean, it's kind of infinite. Isn't the remedy we're just going to make facial recognition technology effectively outlawed, except in certain circumstances where you have to seek approval for it rather than the other way around? I mean, isn't the risk of this so much higher than the potential benefit? Tell me if I'm being too draconian here. What are your thoughts?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the other 2 companies that are currently under investigation for making use of facial recognition technology are Bunnings and Kmart, which was revealed by our friends at Choice. But this seems quite a clear example of the justification for use of this technology completely mismatched with the potential gravity of the information that you're collecting, what use might be made of it, what damage might be wrought if it is lost or stolen. And, with Bunnings and Kmart, I think the justification is, we've got to stop stock loss, But I'm not sure that really justifies collecting the most sensitive information, giving it to a range of other people to analyse, very few limits, and almost seemingly no clear understanding of consent by almost anyone, and it's sort of hiding in plain sight. So in those circumstances, I think corporations haven't shown that they can be trusted with this information. In those circumstances, maybe an outright ban is the simplest way to deal with it. Like, it got me thinking, this case, because obviously it was found to be an interference with privacy, right? And it still took the regulators 3 years to kind of get them up to scratch so that they'd be compliant. And it is like a fiasco, don't get me wrong, but it was found to be in breach of the Privacy Act. And I think to myself, what do I want changed about the Privacy Act that might make this a better situation for people who are affected? And I suppose what I want is a Privacy Act that would deter this from happening at all. When you look at the arguments that were put by 7-Eleven, they say, oh, well, it's not personal information because it's de-identified. You know, it's not just a facial image, it's a face print. So you couldn't possibly identify the person. You know, the commissioner said, no, that's wrong. You know, they said there's no harm done because it's not sensitive information. It's just a string of text. No, not true. Like, it was found to be in breach. And of course, then this whole justification, is it reasonably necessary for our business purpose? And the commissioner said no. But someone's gone through and said, we're going to do this, right, in 7-Eleven a number of years ago. You want a Privacy Act that makes it very clear that this is not justifiable because it doesn't pass the pub test for a variety of different reasons. And the justification for it is so flimsy, in my opinion, compared to the seriousness of the data collected and used, that it should be obvious to, and it was obvious to many people who saw this scandal unfold among the general public. So let's create a Privacy Act that makes that absolutely clear so that it doesn't happen at all. And then, of course, there are consequences. There should be consequences when there is an interference with privacy, like being able to sue them and get penalties, damages, whatever. But at the first instance, what I want is a set of laws that would prohibit it to begin with.
Lee, have you got a take on this?
From a technological perspective, what it brings to mind is the emergence of a lot of face search apps that are being built, and that kind of terrifies me, to be honest, because basically there are now apps that have been released where you can take a photo of someone and it searches and literally brings up who that person is. And I think that we need to be bringing in laws really quickly around that, because and what we're seeing as well is there's like a reaction to it where people have these masks that blur them from having face search, basically. So
explain to me face search. How does face search?
Basically, if I saw you on the street, Pete, and I didn't know who you were, but I wanted to know who you are, there is technology now that I could take a photo of you and it would immediately tell me who you are.
That's creepy. That's like that app where you heard a bit of music, they'd tell you the song, except with people.
It's basically Shazam for face, yeah. And the technology is there, and there are some. I'll have to dig up the article that's about this. There's actually a podcast on it. But yeah, about the technology and the fact that you can get a face search, basically, particularly on the dark web. And so, okay, so the technology is there. And how do we now, I honestly, I don't know from a government perspective how that works, but it's certainly something that needs to be talked about.
Yeah, that feels like a genie that may be out of a bottle.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that a lot of the technology feels a bit that way.
Yeah.
Maybe not right ban's the answer. I'm with Dan.
Or masks. We could all just go around wearing masks.
Well,
there's a solution.
If you think about what the future rejection of that is that it probably will have, I don't know, it seems so odd to me, but something that blurs your face, like that's crazy. But yeah.
Let's bring back the pandemic.
Well, they pick it up from just your eyes. They developed the technology that you can still get it without a mask on. So it would need to be something that blurs it from a technological perspective.
Wow. We better move on because I've lost control of our timeline already. I was going to raise the issue of the Misinformation and Disinformation Bill, which has also gone into the Parliament in this sitting period just past. One of the recommendations of the Digital Platforms Inquiry from the ACCC all those years ago, recommendation that platforms should take responsibility for deliberately dangerous and disingenuous content. on one level, this is a requirement that platforms have risk mitigation processes in place, as the Minister Roland says, goes to the systems and processes of the platforms and says they need to have methods in place to be able to identify and do something about misinfo and disinfo. But that's where it gets complicated, because if you read the legislation, it seems like it's designed to get free speech advocates hot under the collar, because the effort to define what serious harm could include is really tricky. And if you look at it on paper, it goes to imminent harm to the Australian economy, damage to critical infrastructure, disruption of emergency services, intentionally inflicting physical injury to any individual in Australia, but also some quite broad vilification definitions, and then some quite broad coveralls that just sort of talk, and I'm no lawyer, am I, Lizzie, but just of could do damage. So it's almost, it feels like it's open-ended. So the opposition's in a flurry. This bill's got no place in Australia. Elon Musk says it's fascist. Even Friendly Geordies thinks it's over the top. But I think a lot of it feels like they're taking one narrative around media control and then turning it into what this bill is trying to do. But you were down in the trenches with it, Dan. Like, what's your sense on it? Is the outrage overblown, or is there a real risk that trying to create platform responsibility has these not even unintended consequences, but consequences?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a very rare circumstance where I'm on a unity ticket with Friendly Geordies and the coalition. I think this stinks. And I mean, you've heard me bang on for ages about the fact that the social media platforms, in particular Meta, need to take more responsibility for what appears on their platform. So I'm not downplaying the problem. I think it is real and significant. But the definition of what is harmful content is way too broad to be effective. I think it will end up, or risk.
Even if it is only linked to a requirement to have a risk mitigation strategy, it's not about taking down that content. It's about saying you've got to have a plan to deal with it.
Sure, and I get that, and I think that does make this less bad, but it doesn't solve the problem. I think the problem with this bill is it is going after the wrong issue. It is going after the mis and disinformation from people, even when some of those are bad actors, when the real cause of harm here is not the mis and disinformation on its own, but the amplification of that mis and disinformation by the algorithms. That is the problem that we need to be solving first and foremost. And maybe this is the downstream one that you solve next. But we don't know. I mean, we talked about this a few weeks ago with the UK riots. We never know how much of this shitty content is getting amplified across the platforms, and therefore how many people are seeing it, how many people are reacting to it, how many people are believing in it, how many people are taking to the streets. And so a much, much better approach would be to require that these algorithms are transparent and have some sort of oversight over, some kind of democratic oversight over how they operate. Because while the platforms, as we've said a million times before, while the platforms are going to be incentivized around engagement at all costs, and while their algorithms remain a black box, there is simply no way of addressing this issue at the root cause. And the problem is the amplification of the content first and foremost. That's what the government should be going after first, I think.
Lizzie, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, it's like asking for directions and saying I wouldn't want to start from here. You know, like, I do think this is a wrong-headed approach to the problem as well. So, you know, Digital Rights Watch has made a submission on this. There's going to be a process in hearings. I'm not convinced if you're trying to tackle mis and disinformation, you would do it this way. You're right that it is about risk mitigation in the sense that it's about the creation of codes, but there are consequences if you don't comply with the code, including penalties and the like. And there's consequences if you don't develop a code to the liking of ACMA, right? So then the government can step in and draft those codes. Now, I think...
But isn't that okay? Isn't it okay for the government to say, if you don't come up with a decent code to manage the dangerous content on your platform, then we'll do it for you?
Well, I mean, this is also what happens in e-safety, dare I say it, in relation to certain kinds of content that is particularly harmful, but also, you know, illegal content, like certain kinds of pro-terror content and adult content and the like. So, I mean, this is what already is happening in relation to e-safety, and I think that is a problem, and it's something that we've criticised the regulator of having too many powers for. I think there is problems with designing regulations in that way, because it starts to lose some of the democratic oversight, because it ends up being done by government and industry, and there are weaknesses in that when you don't have, for example, a robust civil society to engage with it. But I understand your argument that they need to have a strategy, but if there are very serious pecuniary consequences for not having that strategy, it does start to look like a form of regulation that has more bite than you're letting on, I suppose, is what I would say. My one big beef I had, in addition to the ones that Dan raised as well, is that what's entirely excluded from this is content generated by professional news organisations. And they are increasingly, there are sections of the media where their business model is aligned with the kind of algorithmic amplification that Dan is talking about. And it's very tempting for mainstream media organisations to subscribe to that approach to income generation. So part of it is mainstream media aligns with the business model of social media to monetize viral content without a concern about whether it's truthful or honest or contributes to the public good in terms of having a debate about topics. So that, I think, is also a problem, because we can't just...
So we don't like the regulation, but it should apply to the media as well.
No, that's my point. I think we're at the wrong starting point. What you actually want to do is target the business model that allows for monetization of viral content, that encourages engagement above other considerations, because it is about extracting personal information to facilitate for targeted advertising. That's my point. Like we are at the wrong starting point for this problem. This ends up being damaging because it both doesn't go far enough but goes too far in various ways, because it's the wrong framework.
And Lee, you've been doing a bit of writing on this.
Yeah, I have been. I couldn't agree more. I think the platform economics that incentivize mass disinformation and misinformation at the moment is something that we need to address. It reminds me of the back in I think it was 2018, when it was uncovered that the Facebook algorithm was promoting the content that had the angry face emoji being used more. So it's fueling that kind of content, because it's like that fear-based, shocking kind of content coming to the top. And there was recently an article that came out from Colorado where there was this true crime YouTube video that was completely, made up, that got 2 million views, 8,000 comments. Everyone's thinking that it's real. It's being reported, and none of it was real. None of the people in the video were real. But because of the virality of it, and also just the nature of the content, it just kept on fueling the algorithm. It's still up on YouTube. It's not real. And the fact that the platform gets money from that, because obviously there's lots of people watching it, the ads are coming through. And similarly, the content creator is incentivized to create content that is more and more ludicrous and going to bring up that fear or that shock. That it's all down to the platform economics and how we're incentivizing this kind of information that's spreading. So I do agree that we have to address the system, and that the big tech needs to be held more accountable in terms of how their models work, the business model itself.
So that's fascinating. So we're saying big tech should be held more accountable, but not in this way.
Well, I do think that they need to figure out how to identify when content is not factual and not allow it to go up. I don't know. Maybe that's too far. I'm not sure, but certainly there needs to be some sort of way of mitigating that. It's a really difficult thing to do, because obviously there's a lot of opinions based on YouTube, and it's a hard topic to address.
I do think one of the bill that is better, or whatever, or that starts to get some of the problem we're identifying, is around transparency, around decision-making and stuff. And what I think is also key is transparency in algorithmic design. Like, I think it's depressing that CrowdTangle is gone, for example, because how do we get an insight into this problem? It becomes almost evidence-free policymaking in this space because we don't know what kinds of posts end up being popular except in like kind of an anecdotal sense. We set up these vast kind of academic observatories to figure out how people are experiencing the web when these companies know this stuff, right? So we should be extracting information from them about what goes viral, whether it's something that's good or bad. Allow people to assess what the safety is of these spaces themselves in order to know whether they should be engaging with them. Like that seems like something that we could do more of. And there is proposals in there for like literacy and having a literacy plan, not just a risk mitigation plan, which I like that general imperative. And I think scrutiny on that algorithm, not just for researchers to see, but for the public to see, for the regulator to publish reports on, these would be useful contributions to understanding how algorithmic amplification works. I just think the content regime has ended up being this kind of very controversial aspect of the bill. I don't think it's entirely without foundation, but I think it is also a bit unrealistic to assume. I don't have a huge amount of sympathy for the libertarian viewpoint that says this is the biggest shaper of speech, what ACMA will do in terms of takedowns. I actually think the biggest shaper of online spaces in terms of an information ecosystem, the biggest influence shaping that is algorithmic amplification focused on profit, the profit motive. And that I think is worthy of some further interrogation rather than just focusing on the takedown powers of government, notwithstanding it elicits huge amounts of controversy.
Well, if reality's getting us all down, the good news is the metaverse is one step closer with the launch or the soft launch of the Zoox Orion AI glasses. Dan, have you been given a test drive? I know you're very excited about them, but what do we need to know about this? And is the dream about to become a reality?
Maybe. So a bit of background. So last week, Meta held a demo day of their Orion AR glasses or augmented reality glasses. And no, I don't have a pair, Pete. I think they've only made about 1,000 of these as prototypes. So this was very much a day that was just for the media. And apparently these glasses, I don't think are going to be available to purchase until 2027. And at the moment, they're costing about $10,000 each to make. So I think they're going to need to figure out a way to get the prices down a little bit before it's going to be a consumer product. And, you know, you sort of wonder why Meta, when it had this demo day, I mean, it's generated a huge amount of very positive press from a lot of the tech writers in the US. And I guess it's probably because they're spending so much money on their Reality Labs division that they probably wanted to relieve some of the pressure and try and get their share price up. I think I looked at this earlier. They've spent $46 billion on Reality Labs since 2021, and they've lost $31 billion. So, and the outcome of that is, the Quest and Vision, whatever the things they are, and now these new glasses, which cost $10,000 a pair. Anyway, I'm just going to lean into my tech pro role here for a minute, but let me describe what they are. So it's hardware that comes in three parts, right? So it's glasses that they weigh less than 100 grams. So they're pretty light, very different to the Apple Vision Pro, which came out a year or so ago. So that's one part of it. It also comes with a wristband, which reads hand gestures, which you wear at the same time. And it also comes with a wireless puck that effectively offloads all the computer processing to a device which you can put in your pocket. And again, it's different from the Apple Vision Pro, which was wired. This one is smaller, lighter, sits in your pocket. And I guess, look, the takeaway from this is that it's just a much more practical product. I was pretty skeptical of the Apple Vision Pro as an amazing device. It seems to be. I've never used one, to be honest, but it's an amazing device because it was just such a clunky, heavy thing, and it sort of took you away from reality. I just couldn't see it becoming a mainstream product, which was going to be going to become the next sort of massive consumer computing device. But what these glasses do is they're AR, right, not VR, and so they've got holographic displays that overlay digital elements onto the real world. So that's got practical applications. You can view messages or control Spotify. You can watch YouTube. You can also look at things in the real world and ask your glasses what they are. It's coming back to the creepy conversation.
You could do face search for sure, couldn't you?
Exactly. I mean, you can see that coming, right? Like you can see it where you could ask your glasses who this person is, and it could scan the web and find a photo
and have sex with them pretty easily. Yeah.
That's probably where it's going.
I don't know if that's why my mind went straight there, but yeah.
It's telling. So anyway, I'm going to lean into my tech pro for a minute, and then I'm going to tell you why I'm freaked out about it in my burning platforms persona. So It's bloody amazing technology. I'm not sure if any of you have seen any of the videos from any of the tech journalists that have been there, but this does look incredible. And it does. I've now become, in the space of a week, I've gone from completely skeptical that AR or VR was going to be the next consumer technology platform to thinking this is almost certainly going to be that platform. Probably not of the scale of the smartphone or the iPhone, but I think it's the capabilities of this are substantial. The application of it are substantial. You can see it becoming a very useful device. And if they can make them lighter and cheaper, which they're on the way to being, then I think it's almost certainly going to have pretty massive consumer adoption. But here's the part of it that absolutely creeps me out, right? So there's two concerns I've got. One is it's kind of another step towards the cyborgification. I'm not sure if that's a term, but of humans that we're already going down. I already worry about the amount of time that I spend with my earbuds in my ears and my Apple Watch on. And now with this, you kind of 3 of the 5 senses are gone, right? So we've got the wristband, you've got touch with the glasses, you've got vision, you've already got the earbuds for your ears. Like it's really just smell and taste, which are the last 2 senses to be dominated by tech. So I think it just feels to me like, you know, the frog is slowly being boiled towards this sort of cyborg future that we're seeing inevitably on our path towards.
And as the Zook says, the main use of this is going to be interacting with AI, which is even more depressing.
Yeah, totally. And look, the last part of this, and
sorry, I cut you off. Give me your second. Yeah.
Last bit, and then I'll let other people get a word in. The other part of it is just the surveillance element of this, which we touched on earlier. There's I think 18 cameras or something on these glasses, something like that. And it just feels like it's going to be so easy now to what we talked about before, which was, you know, ask the glasses who that person is you just walk past, which has pretty creepy applications. But I guess the thing that concerns me about it more is just what that does to the sense of presence that we are already struggling with. I already hate, I've talked about this before, I hate it when you go to a concert and when there's a really fantastic moment at the concert, nobody pays attention to it anymore. They get their phones out and try and capture it so they can put it on social media. It just destroys the moment. And this just feels like it's going to take that and put it on steroids. And it's just everything's going to be captured. Everything's going to be filmed. No one's going to be present. And I'm really in 2 minds about it because I'm really excited about the tech. I'm probably going to buy a pair. You can all give me shit when I do. But it does feel like we're going into a future which is also has some pretty dark applications. So what do others think?
It's only $10,000. Lee, have you had much of a vibe on this?
I would add to that I think that it will change how we interact with each other, in that if you have this perception that you might be being recorded constantly by the person you're talking to, how does that change conversation, right? You start to hold back a lot more, and that disconnection will just be, you know, increased. So yeah, I agree. There's this amazing technology, absolutely, but I also hold similar worries and concerns.
Lee, just on that point, by the way, I have this conversation with my kids, with my daughter, where she says that they don't want to take the risks that perhaps we did when we were younger, which were probably more healthy than not because everyone's got a camera in their pocket, and this just feels like it's going to take that to another level. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think that, yeah, I don't know, being a millennial that came up with Facebook and thinking back to the photos, like how we uploaded every single photo when we were, I don't know, 2008 or whatever. It's, yeah, you go, and then seeing Gen Z being very different to that because of the realization of what that data is used for now, is that I think it'll stop people from doing things. Yeah.
Lizzie?
Yeah, I'm a slow adopter, so I'm the wrong person to ask. It takes me a long time to take any consumer tech and run with it. I'm unimpressed by it all, but I think I'm a curmudgeon, right? But one thing I don't understand is, why did Google Glass fail where this is likely to succeed? Because that was a number of years ago, you know, everyone got called a glass hole or whatever was wearing them, and it didn't survive and make it into a consumer product. And in fact, it is used in industrial settings, as I understand it, although the last I checked, I don't know if it still is, but for people doing complicated manufacturing, like you're building a car, you can know which part goes where or whatever because you've got the assistance of augmented reality in the form of your glasses as you wear it. And that makes sense to me as an industrial application. And I'm not clear I understand why Facebook or Meta is likely to succeed where Google failed, except, maybe that is just Google's not good at things. They made a search engine and then acquired all their other businesses. I don't know. Like, that's the criticism of Google. I mean, I do wonder whether this is going to be a situation, though, where there is resistance to the consumer product for precisely the reasons that you talked about. Like, I do wonder whether it will be perceived as a bit of an asshole behavior to wander around with your glasses on, much in the same way I accidentally wore my headphones. I'd forgotten that I had them in when I went to the doctor, and then I was hugely embarrassed and had to ring and apologise because I thought I looked like such a prick to the doctor. And I do wonder whether there'll be like a social function.
Were you listening to a podcast while you're in there?
No, I just was being absent-minded. But that's never happened other than that. But the point I'm making, I suppose, is like there is now a protocol developing around how to be present, which is a skill that I think younger generations are learning because the pull of this technology is so strong, and it's particularly for older generations who end up being dragged into it because they haven't been forced to develop that social skill of finding ways to be present. So in some ways I feel maybe a younger generation might be less inclined or less hesitant to take this up at scale in the same way that, say, the smartphone was very transformative as a piece of consumer tech and now is universal. For the reasons that we described, because there is, that I just mentioned, because there is this hesitancy around denying presence of resisting engagement, or that will be a criteria now that people use if purchasing technology, but then also when they use it, and that might be a criteria for participating in social life as well. That you sort of have to.
But I'm sure they'll have a mindfulness app that you can access and have the experience of being in the real world, free of technology and free of surveillance.
Quiet time,
just like the real thing, and on the Thai beach. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Let's spend a bit of time now. I'm talking about Lee and some of her work and some of her observations around OpenAI. We could go into this conversation in lots of different ways, but I just feel like the starting point is, so what's with Sam Altman? What's going on from where you sit?
I feel like let's just go back a couple of weeks. So they've had a pretty big couple of weeks where there's, some, I guess, impressive model releases, but also a lot happening at the OpenAI headquarters. So they released their O1 model that was blowing a lot of the benchmarks out of the park in terms of reasoning capabilities and coding and mathematics and stuff like that. Then they also released their advanced voice model, which has the ability to adjust its accents and tones, and also can hear your tone and respond to you accordingly. So they've had a couple of pretty big announcements, and that's interesting because off the back of that, you then have pretty much a bunch of people leave OpenAI just as they've released the most powerful and impressive model. So those two things don't really make a lot of sense when you think about it. But basically, Mira Murati has left CTO of OpenAI, comes off the back of other people leaving, like Ilya Sutskever in May, and then Greg Brockman also took a year of leave from OpenAI. So you've got the pretty much 3 out of the 4 of the top 4 in OpenAI leaving, and just Sam Altman there left, and Greg Brockman on leave. And then
sorry to interrupt. Isn't that just a function, though, of these were all the people that effectively didn't side with Sam straight away when the board tried to out him previously, and he came back, stabilized the company, and then took his retribution? Like, isn't this just a simple story of Sam sacked them and was just biding his time until he could?
Could be. Greg Brockman was well behind him. Admittedly, he's only taken a year of leave, so he's not left the company, but he has taken that year just in time for a lot of pretty significant announcements. You're right, that could be could be what's happening. But then there's also the news around the possible shift from OpenAI being a not-for-profit, non-profit to a profit model, which may have been something else that the people that have left didn't agree with. They also, they used to have a safety alignment team. They weren't able to get the resources and compute that they had asked for. So they've all left and they're all gone to places like Anthropic and whatnot. So there's certainly a lot going on. And then, this latest news of the move to possibly the move to profit. And there was an article that went around that said Sam Altman was going to get this giant stake of 7%, but then he came back and said that wasn't real. But we don't know how things are going to roll out from here. But it certainly is very tumultuous.
Thinking of this as an inflection point from a not-for-profit to a for-profit, how do you think that's going to change the way the technology evolves? Because we're kind of like in this open-ended future where we're taking a different road.
Yeah, it is interesting to see that shift. And I would say if you look at their, they had this leak of their 5 levels to AGI thing, that we're now with the O1 being released, they're saying that they've achieved reasoning. There is some skepticism towards whether that's true, and it's not entirely able to do reasoning, but it's certainly a big increase in its ability there. But the next stage being that it's going to work on agents, and agents probably do have a pretty commercial value, and that's basically where you are where they're able to not just predict the next word like these large language models do, but predict the next action, which means that they can autonomously go off and do tasks and jobs, right? So if they achieve that level and they've got a for-profit model, obviously that's going to be taking a lot of looking at taking a lot of jobs in different areas that would be following an agent path. So that's one thing that could happen. They've also got a couple of other models products that they've got on the back burner, like Sora, which is their video model. They've been trying to do deals with a lot of Hollywood with that. Then they've got Search GPT, which is their product that is going to try to compete with Google. So it certainly sounds like they're going down that product level. And there's also the news of there's some rumors around the price being increased as well in Pro. So it certainly feels like they're trying to get that profit wheel going there.
Oh. And just to set the scene, finally, he's also put out his manifesto, which I forgot to mention, the intelligence age. What do we learn from that piece of doggerel?
Yeah, so it's not the first time Sam Altman's put out a paper with lots of a blog article putting out his view of the future. He also wrote one called Moore's Law of Everything in 2021, which had a bit more of a negative, or had some negativity in that one. This one is very positive about the intelligence age that we're just entering. It had one line that says, and we've got to be careful with certain things, basically, but everything else is positive, going into this prosperity era where intelligence will unlock all of these opportunities, and basically, that humanity, 100 years' time won't be able to imagine how prosperous we are.
It's going to fix the climate, establish a space colony, discovery of all of physics, near limitless intelligent and abundant energy.
And
he's feeling good.
Well, he is. He's very confident there. I think it feels very. I think one thing I'll say about this is also that there's research out at the moment that so if they're trying to push in order to train future models, you obviously need compute and more data, but a lot of the internet data has already been used to train the models, and now there's an issue where I think it's something like 57% of the internet, like text-based internet, is now AI generated. And what that means for future models is that there's an issue when an AI trains on AI content, that it actually completely kind of starts to have model collapse. So I think from a technological perspective, is he saying this too soon? Because perhaps you don't have, if you need compute and you need data in order to achieve this, amazing age of prosperity, perhaps one of those things won't be there. But then if you've got the metaverse and it's adding more data, I don't know. So there's probably different ways of looking at this because metaverse will create a lot of data, right?
But Lee, isn't one of the benefits of the new model, the so-called strawberry update or O1 model? I mean, that seems to me, from what I have read, that seems to be a really positive development for AI, because it doesn't just rely on what you're saying for the first time. It doesn't just rely on more data and larger models in order to be able to become better. It actually does allow reasoning. And it seems to me that that's going to result in, more accurate results, less prone to hallucinations, less data, less power to power the model. They can also be run on your device as opposed to being run by these in the cloud on servers owned by these huge corporations overseas. I mean, doesn't that potentially take this closer to the potential of AI and away from some of the things that where previously the risk of, to take Nick Bostrom's example of, an AI turning the world into paperclips, because it doesn't understand the context of the decision being asked with. Like, it seems like this development makes that less likely, not more likely. Am I, as usual, being too optimistic?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
No. I would agree that there's not. I'm not as worried about the alignment of the safety of it. Perhaps it's probably there are other issues around it. I think that the O1 model, it's amazing how it does, how it works, and it is using a chain of thought prompting strategy behind the scenes in order to make it stop and think before it just predicts the next token. So it's definitely a better way of approaching for things like mathematics and coding and physics. You wouldn't use it for certain tasks because it's not, probably not for language-based tasks, but it is good for those ones that do require reasoning. It's certainly an impressive step ahead. It's just whether Sam Altman's paper is, jumping the gun a little bit, maybe. But I'm impressed by the model. I am.
I mean, there is that query around whether it would be better at lying because of its capacity to reason. So, it's not necessarily a trend downward in terms of risk. But anyway, can I ask a different question though? You pointed out to us before we started recording that there's a message on the OpenAI website about investing in the company. And I was not at all surprised to learn that they've transformed to a for-profit company, that they started out as non-profit. That struck me as the most obvious thing that was going to happen. But the investment notification on their website talks about how this is not a safe investment, shall we say, and that this message about how we're developing AI for the benefit of humanity in a safe way takes precedence over any obligation to return a profit to investors. Now, I wonder whether that's got any merit in law, but that's a slightly secondary question. I wanted to ask you about what you think about the intent behind these founders. It just strikes me as full of hubris. I wonder whether that's too cynical, whether this model of design, why shift to a for-profit motive away from a non-profit one if you have got this framing around profit being a secondary concern to the benefit of bringing the benefits of safe AI to humanity? And then are we right to feel concerned about that move and what is contained in it, what obligations they owe to investors, be they large or small?
Yeah, that really difficult one to answer as to, that shift is significant because it does say on their website, it also says something about the reason why it's a high risk investment is that we don't know what the function of money will be in a post-AGI world. So there's
that's very convenient answer.
Why are they going to for profit? It is. I mean, it seems funny seeing that early on saying these things about money's not even going to exist.
It feels like a strawberry answer, I have to say. ChatGPT answer to the problem. Anyway, carry on, Lee. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think it's a hard one to answer. That the two different things happening there seem hard to connect, and there's one thing that they're saying, and then one thing they're doing. And so
Do you
there's
think
always
we're
been
right
this.
to be cynical then? Is that a kind of the shorthand? You're okay, you are nodding. So
I don't know. It's yes, that I think we've got to question it because
is it any different though? I mean, they've basically been operating as a for-profit company ever since they took investment from Microsoft.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, this is the least surprising development in OpenAI's history. Of all the things that they are doing, they basically set up this. I think they set this up as a not-for-profit, not realizing that they were going to be so successful. When, oh shit, this is going to be really successful. Sorry, I'm swearing a lot tonight. And all of a sudden went, quick, how do we make this a for-profit company so that we can actually get some funding in to make this work? And now they're just completing that process. I don't think it really changes how they operate at all. Sam's already won the battle over the people that were concerned about safety. The people that were concerned about safety on their board have left. He's just now basically taking it into the direction which I think it was always going to be as soon as they took on the Microsoft investment. It's now they're just a for-profit
But there was an inflection point. There could have been a world where this was a Wikipedia model, that it was just a amazing source that someone wasn't trying to exploit commercially, and it's gone a different route.
I disagree, mate, because I think that the difference between this and Wikipedia, I mean, I wish you were right, but I think the difference between this and Wikipedia is the expense of running these models, the compute power you need is so high that you need so much capital, particularly in the early days of that company. There was no option for them to actually reach where they have reached now without a huge amount of capital, which they were never going to get unless they were operating as a for-profit company. So I just think this was inevitable.
Should we treat Sam Altman as anything other than a salesman then? Like, I feel like this posturing is, like, the manifesto is ridiculous in my view. And I sort of don't understand why people take it seriously. But again, like, am I a cynical curmudgeon? Like, I think he's got one job, which is to sell his product.
We've established this, but yes. Yes, and. Yes,
exactly. Like, he's got one job now to kind of make good on the investments he's made, right, to sell his product. And I like, all this posturing just seems in aid of that, like, if that's their motivation. I mean, am I wrong? Do you think there's merit to some of this thinking? I mean, he gets his best ideas from films and he often does it incorrectly, like he takes the wrong message. Like, this is the guy supposedly leading.
Although Scarlett Johansson's voice is still there in the new release as well, I noticed there is still that lilt. Lee, you're our guest. Say something. We're just dominating.
Look, I think that putting an article out like that gets investors excited. So that's, one of the reasons why I'd be doing something like that. It's more likely that he'll be able to raise funding. Look, there's the models are impressive, but it is odd for it to. I think he has. I see what Dan's saying, but I also, he has been saying one thing, and it has sort of, it feels like it's shifting over time. And
to be clear, I'm not saying that he is completely linear in his thinking, and I'm not saying he's anything but a salesperson, and I'm not saying he doesn't think he's a little bit the messiah with that manifesto that he published as well. But I'm just making the point that it's been a for-profit company for a while.
But that bigger piece of whether this whole thing is just a big sales job, the strength of AI, the risk of AI. I know you shared with me a really interesting piece this week, Lizzie, where challenging the idea of AI rather than just you've got your different elements of technology that has always been there, the hardware, the software, the network, and the data. This isn't new. It's just that. So, Lee, I know you're a tech optimist. You spend your time training people how to use this technology responsible. So can you see it as a useful tool and also see it as a massive sales job at the same time? Or how do you reconcile those two stories?
It's that's an interesting perspective there. I think that the application of the technology is there, and it's significant and impressive. There's that recent breakthrough that happened with it being able to analyze 70 million different different materials and turn it down into like 80, and then they figured out that it was able to basically create new lithium batteries that reduced it by 70%. There are applications of this AI technology that is going to be really significant, to the world. And so, yeah, there's fantastic applications. However, we do have the other side of it where the risks of the technology are there as well, and it's more from things like misinformation, using the technology incorrectly. Those are
models.
two really difficult things to navigate.
It comes down to the business models, the big tech business models, but then also, I look at. We had this interesting discussion with some guys from Microsoft the other day about deep fakes in elections and saying, we're going to put all these guardrails around it. It's like, can you just give me one good use case of deep fakes? Like, there's no responsible use of deep fakes in election. And all they could come up with was Imran Khan in prison. But that's like an outlier, like that he could stand for office. So give him an exemption. Don't let everyone else deep fake their politics. It just feels to me that when the business model is about the current digital economy, as opposed to science or coming up with physics or whatever, like you're not playing that for eyeballs. So
I see what you mean. I see what you mean. I think that it's what applications should it be allowed to be used in, and perhaps I think the deep fakes. I agree. I'm with you, Pete. I don't think that there is a positive application of that. I can't think of one. And perhaps there needs to be, it just basically needs to be banned, that kind of technology. But it's, how do you go about that now that it's on the dark web? Like it's not even on the dark web, it's just everywhere.
So how do we round out this conversation after, obviously this is a very big week. Manifesto, new product, new business model. What do you think we're going to be talking about around OpenAI in 6 months, 12 months' time?
They'll probably be for profit. And I would say they'll be talking up their GPT-5 model that will come. It'll probably have agentic capabilities. It probably perhaps maybe more expensive model, and Microsoft probably ramping that into some of their tooling as well. Obviously, they've got that partnership. I mean those are probably the data points that I would say would be likely.
Do you think there's any risk that there will be fewer consumer integrations? I must say, I feel like AI is being integrated into all these things that I have no use for. But again, I'm not sure I'm the good test subject for these kinds of things. But I couldn't care less about Meta having AI on the Instagram app or, and also as the trust declines, particularly as you get this Habsburg AI where it's trained on its own excretions, then it becomes stupider or less functional or more hallucinatory, whatever the word is. But the point I'm making is, do you think the trust might start to decline? Is that a realistic threat? And do you think consumer integrations might start to decline or be stripped away as that trust does start to collapse?
I think that's interesting. I think that trust is already collapsing on AI for sure. But what is interesting is that I think that a lot of companies have just thrown spaghetti at the wall when it comes to their AI products, and they haven't been thinking about the user or why someone might want to use it. They're just like, it just becomes this little magic button that they put on something, and they haven't actually thought about why they've put it there. So absolutely, I mean that will start to have, they'll start to see that there's no ROI on it. And then they'll have to bring a proper lens to developing products, which is a good thing, as opposed to just being like, look, here's a button, and now you can generate yourself in a silly hat. And there's, which no one's doing.
I think we are starting to see that now, though. I think we've gone through the phase of people sprinkling AI dust over everything as a novelty to it's now starting to have real applications which are genuinely 10xing productivity or efficiency or whatever else. So I think we'll start to see more of that as people. I mean, keep in mind, this is such new technology. It's brand new, and it's such a step change in capability. Of course, this is what I would say, but I think with the next decade, we're actually going to see the real beneficial use cases. There'll be a lot of trouble on the way through, to be clear, but I think we're also going to see lots of benefits.
Yeah.
I do
And
wonder
will
whether
Sam Altman end up on the side of the angels or not?
that's right. I do wonder what the fate will be of large companies, because maybe there's a utility in more bespoke AI companies developing enterprise
Small language models.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, like, I'm in the legal sector. Obviously, there's a whole explosion of legal AI tools, which I think are useful. I've been using AI tools for a while, in fact, but they aren't like a Sam Altman-led thing. It's quite a different enterprise setting.
It is, but they often use the large language models from OpenAI at the back end. So they'll develop their tools on specific to the legal industry, but then the large language models underneath are either OpenAI or Anthropic or Google or something like that. So yeah, it may very well be that OpenAI mostly ends up being used for its API and access to the large language model as opposed to the interface. That said, I think that people will still get a lot of use out of just using ChatGPT because it's accessible and easy to use.
Well, I think this conversation will be going on for a while to come. But thank you for joining us tonight, Lee, on what has been a very exciting week in the world of OpenAI. I feel like I've hit the wall. It's about that time. Thanks for spending time, guys. Dan, get back to your hotel room. Lizzie, thanks for being part of it again. And Lee, thanks again for being a guest. Catch you all soon. Burning Platforms was brought to you by Per Capita's Centre of the Public Square. It was recorded on October 1 and produced on Naarm land by Rebecca Cannell. Talk again soon.